Happy Sunday, fantasy football fans. We are back once again. This is The Slate, brought to you by GridironRatings.com. I am your host, Jeff DiMatteo. With me, as always, my partner in crime, Kyle Carroll. Kyle, how are you?
I'm doing good. My work started a weight loss competition this week, and I am on day 2. It's going okay. It's kind of like right into football season. I was like, man, they could have put this at a different time because we usually have a tradition of like ordering like a bunch of Chick-fil-A on like Thursday night football and just taking it down. And now it's like, well, I guess I got to pass on that this year. Very unfortunate. But
Chick-fil-A is salads, right? Like you can go grilled instead of fried on the chicken, right?
So actually, we looked them up. The fried chicken nuggets themselves, they're not bad in calories, but it's the sauce. Like I love Chick-fil-A sauce. That will absolutely catch up to you. That stuff is so high in calories, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, you got to not drink it right out of the tub is the thing.
It's not possible. I love some Chick-fil-A sauce.
Yeah, I know it's so good. They sell it by the bottle now.
Yeah, they do. At Walmart, you can get it. We get it all the time.
It's pretty wild. Anyway. So that's enough about Chick-fil-A. They're not a sponsor of the show, so we don't want to give them too much.
Not yet.
Not yet. So let's get right to it. We've got a little bit of news to hit on before we get into the DFS stuff today. Hey, Jameis Winston named the starter in New Orleans. So
I was on the team Taysom Winston. Wow. I tried to put something there together. I was on Taysom Hill side because I thought that this offense just needed playmaking ability. I thought that, hey, look, Taysom played pretty well last year. Michael Thomas is out. They're going to need playmakers on the field. Winston looked better than I really expected, and we're going to talk probably about Marquez Callaway here a little bit later on the DFS show because he has really impressed me. Every year there's some offseason players that kind of get some hype, and then they perform well in the preseason. I always think of like Amir Abdullah. He's like the perfect this guy was like, oh man, and he shot up draft boards and ends up not being
evaporating.
Yeah,
he evaporated.
Callaway's actually done pretty well this offseason, and Winston's really good for this offense as far as like Kamara. Kamara's like super safe now for me now that Taysom's on the bench.
Absolutely. Well, as somebody who has more Alvin Kamara than I probably should, a little overweight. I'm pretty thrilled with the Winston news. I love this for Callaway. I love this really for the entirety of the offense. Now, Winston does have a tendency to kind of go tunnel vision, right? He'll zone in on one receiver. See the Mike Evans years, for example, when he was in Tampa Bay, and even to a lesser degree when he had Godwin for the 1 year. Like he kind of gets that one guy and he just pumps him full of targets. I think Callaway is obviously going to be that guy. So, I'm on the Fantasy Pros ECR. In my personal rankings right before that game where he caught 2 touchdowns there, I had Callaway at wide receiver 43. I'm getting ready to do a bunch of updates. He's probably going to be climbing into that inside the top 40. I would imagine he's going to land somewhere in that 36 to 38 range. And not a huge climb, but when you're talking about his ADP and you're talking about, hey, I need a wide receiver 1 and I need him later in my draft, like that's a guy to target. I don't know that a lot of kind of casual drafters are really in on him. The hype kind of hit a little late. So this is still a guy that you can get late. I am a little concerned about him going against number 1 corners. I don't love him against Jair Alexander week 1. That seems a little terrifying for me. But I do like the player overall, definitely worth a look. And we'll talk more about the matchups later on, so we'll get into some of that. But other news, we've got a few other things going on. So since we last were on the show, Travis Etienne, Liz Frank injury. I don't know who this Liz Frank is and why she hates football players, but he's obviously a little joke there. The Liz Frank injury is really bad for running backs. Obviously, it's a minor foot issue. Well, I should say major because he's out for the year. James Robinson season. So running back 4 from last year in PPR is back. Like, how do we feel about this?
Yeah, it's kind of like, the Darrell Henderson situation where it's like, oh, starting running back went down. There was a competent. Not that James Robinson was the backup, but it was like ETN seems to be like the sexy pick, the guy that's going to get all the relevant fantasy value. He shoots back up. I think he'll fall somewhere. For some reason, people are kind of hesitant to kind of like get back on board. And I understand the hesitancy, but there's really no one else in that backfield outside of like Carlos Hyde. Carlos Hyde's going to be annoying, but James Robinson is the superior athlete. He's going to be in on goal line opportunities. And he proved last year that, he can catch the ball. He's no slouch at all in the passing game. I think he's probably going to fall somewhere once the ADP settles. probably in that running back 20-ish range, kind of like going with those Chris Carsons, Josh Jacobs. And we'll see. There's going to be some guys that had him from last year. And it's like, hey, I remember this guy. Like, he helped me win fantasy championships. We'll see where he lands, but he's definitely going to be very, very relevant this year.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm not afraid of James Robinson. I love the player. To me, he seems almost like a younger version of Frank Gore. He can do a little bit of everything. He's not explosive as an athlete, but he does a little bit of everything. I am really worried about Urban Meyer. I really need to see something play calling wise out of him, because the preseason should be vanilla. But man, I'm watching Urban Meyer run Travis Etienne right up the gut, which is how the injury ended up happening. And I'm like, that's not his style. Why are you trying to jam Etienne right up the middle like that? Why isn't he running more of an outside zone thing? Why aren't you, doing what you did in practice where you're splitting him out, getting him into space? Because that's really where you can use his athleticism. I wonder if he can figure out how to use Robinson the way the Jaguars did last year. Urban Meyer, kind of a dope so far in my estimation. I'm really hoping that I'm wrong here and he can figure out how to use him effectively. Most recent news, this one just popped last night, and popped is probably not the right word, but J.K. Dobbins looks like he'll be out for the year with an ACL. The word isn't official yet. He's getting the MRI today. But all indications lead to, and there's a lot of speculation out there, that the knee hyperextension we saw in the third preseason game for the Ravens did in fact lead to an ACL tear plus potentially other ancillary damage. So it's Gus Bus, right? Gus Bus or bust?
Yeah, we'll work on that. We'll work on that one a little bit. But yeah, Gus Edwards, I think we had talked about it early in the offseason, because I go back and look at some of my best ball drafts, and I have him in a lot of drafts. So apparently you and I had a conversation about he's going to be relevant. He'll probably be, 40% of the backfield with Dobbins there. And now it's so weird to me that we have these two injuries, and there's an obvious backup that is going to see an increased workload, and probably even more than the starter was going to get in some circumstances. Right. Like, I expect Gus Edwards to probably get more work than Dobbins was projected to get, just because he's been a super efficient athlete his entire career. And people are like afraid of kind of going in on that. And I understand why. Like, they're a backup for a reason. But Edwards was given a 2-year contract extension this offseason. He has like a career average of like 5.2 yards per carry or somewhere in that range. He's on the best rushing-ish offense for running backs, because you have Lamar Jackson back there. And I understand Lamar Jackson's going to take a lot of touchdowns away. He's going to take some yards away. But, if Gus Edwards has like a week where it's like 13 carries for 140 yards, no one's going to be surprised by that. Like, Lamar Jackson helps the running game more than he hurts it. So absolutely. Yeah. I
think this kind of, harkens back to what we talked about a couple weeks ago, where, handcuffs didn't used to matter. It used to be handcuffing was kind of like, you don't need to do that because, you can always find another running back that's probably more valuable than the handcuff. Well, we're looking at situations now with the Rams. You had Cam Akers goes down. People went nuts over Darrell Henderson. You had Dobbins goes down. People are going nuts over Gus Bus now. You have Etienne goes down. It's James Robinson. Well, if you were taking those early round running backs, even those mid-round running backs where you're getting that guy as your running back one, and you had something invested in that guy and you didn't cuff him, you're now fighting to get that guy at an enhanced price over what you could have had him for on draft day. And so if you can go get your handcuffs and you can still get them reasonably cheap, you should probably consider doing that. Maybe not on all your running backs, but on at least one or two, because the additional game this year is going to mean more injuries. And of course, to kind of piggyback on that whole point, we have Sony Michel was just traded to the Rams, right? And people are going nuts over Sony now. And they're like, oh, Sony Michel.
Yeah. You talk about some craziness. I've seen some people talk about like 6th round, 7th round. And I'm like, oh man, like that is insane to think about. I understand that offense is going to be great, but we don't even know if he's going to be like the 1A or 1B. It's people it's weird how people will overreact to certain situations and then underreact to like James Robinson is obviously the guy, but you're going to take a potential Sony Michel over him. Right. Like that's where like fantasy gets weird for me.
There was some chatter last season where there was all the talk about Akers versus Henderson and who was going to play when, yada, yada, yada. And I believe, and I hope I'm not butchering this name, but I believe it was Jordan Rodriguez, beat writer, I guess, for the Rams. Again, I'm only vaguely familiar with this individual. had come out and said, hey, it's going to be Henderson early, Akers late. And that's exactly what came to pass. And apparently the word from Jordan here is that it's going to be the same thing this year, only it's going to be Henderson early with Sony Michel late. So Sony Michel is still going to be a guy worth owning. He's going to be a guy worth having. You're going to need to, use him in your playoffs. But if you're taking him in round 6 or 7, you're missing other talent. You're really doing it wrong. It's a bad process there. You might want to reevaluate.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's it for all the news. Anything else you want to add in there?
No. I just, being a Broncos fan, I kind of keep an eye on that. Sutton looked pretty good yesterday. That's good for him. I know Twitter's kind of very high on Jerry Jeudy at the moment, even though I'm pretty sure Sutton had a lower average at the target the year prior than he did. So that's just something to keep an eye on. That Sutton looks good. Javonte Williams didn't play yesterday, which was kind of interesting, but Melvin Gordon did. But obviously he's been coming off his groin injury, so he was going to need some preseason snaps. Right. But that backfield looks messy at both of their ADPs. Like I said, as a Broncos fan who keeps up with it, I don't really know which way they're going to go. I assume Gordon's going to start. Maybe Javonte will come on later on the year. But at the moment, I'm kind of out on both of those guys because I don't know which way it's going to go.
Yeah, I'm actually feeling really comfortable with Teddy Bridgewater being the starter now in Denver, and that's kind of official. That has me really leaning to Jeudy. If it was Locke, I really love him going to Cortland Sutton. But again, you're talking about coming off a major injury. Generally, you need that kind of full year to return and get back to form. Give me Jeudy, who's probably going to be working more in the middle of the field. They're going to try and mismatch him up in the slot. I mean, we saw in the preseason how they used him on different crossing routes and crossing patterns, trying to catch him in between zones or get him in a mismatch with somebody. I expect that to continue in the regular season. And if we saw last year with Carolina, Teddy Bridgewater, he did that with Robbie Anderson. It was a lot of crossers, short stuff over the middle, and Robbie Anderson took a ton of targets, and he ended up having a really nice fantasy season. Jerry Jeudy is objectively way more talented than Robbie Anderson.
Yeah.
And so he catches that short route. His ability to break loose in the open field is tenfold what Robbie Anderson can do. So Jerry Jeudy, if he sees 120 targets this year, he could very easily end up finishing as a top 16 wide receiver. I'm not worried about his catch rate from last year. A lot of that is overblown because there was a lot of deep passes trying to hit him on nines and things like that where he's way downfield. And those have just a lower catch rate to begin with. Any pass play over, say, 30 yards, a catch rate around 40% is really good, but as you come closer to the line of scrimmage, that catch rate needs to go up. So people talk about catch rate doesn't matter. Well, it does depending on where you are on the field. If you're in that 10 to 15 yard area and your catch rate is sub 55%, well, guess what? You're not doing very good. That guy's not really worth having. But if his catch rate is 72% in there, you've got yourself a stud.
Yeah, it was the same situation with Curtis Samuel 2 years ago when they were shuffling through quarterbacks, and he had I think I did a Twitter thread on it a couple of years ago, but basically it was he had the lowest accurate targets down the field, and it was I think his catch rate was 60% or 57% or something. It's what's going on with this Curtis Samuel? Everyone loved him this year. It's well, all of his targets are deep and his quarterbacks are trash. And then Teddy Bridgewater comes in and he finishes as a wide receiver 24. And it's oh, okay, good quarterbacks matter. And yeah, I like Bridgewater a lot for this offense. Fant, Sutton, Jeudy, they're all going to have their weeks, but they're all going to be very high floors, I think, this year for this team.
Yeah, I think the ceilings might be limited, but the floors are high enough, and I'll take that for sure.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you what, why don't we break into some DFS? I think that's why we're here. So DFS strategy. One of the first things we always want to talk about is, that when you're thinking about playing DFS and you're getting into it, or even if you haven't played in a year or two or whatever that looks like, is trying to decide what contests you want to get into, right? Everyone's sucked into the idea of, man, I want to hit the milli maker. I want to go in and drop, $5 to play the milli or $20 to play the milli. I'm going to go win big money. I hate to break it to you. You're not. The odds of you winning that are super, super low unless you're going in and you have an optimizer and you're dropping in, 100, 120 entries or some absurd figure, because the field is so huge and there's so many different ways to win it. And you have to hit that one guy no one else has seen that you probably wouldn't have put in a lineup without an optimizer.
Yeah.
And so generally with the milli, we try to stay away from it, right? So what are the kind of games that people should be getting into right now that maybe don't have the same name cachet as the Millie Maker, but are a good way to help build some bankroll.
Yeah, so there are plenty of other contests. I'll just kind of go through them real quick. You have the tournaments, kind of what we talked about, is they're bigger fields. Usually the top 20-ish% are going to cash. It kind of depends on the contest and the rate that the site takes for themselves. So yeah, the contests are just the bigger fields. You're going to have, more money at the top, less money as you get towards the bottom of the payouts. And then, a majority of the field isn't going to cash. You have the head-to-head, which is fun, I think, more for like against your friends or against people because if you do $5 heads up, you're only going to see like a $4 profit, right? So unless you're doing like $1,000 buy-in and you're profiting $900, it's really not worth that because, again, the site is taking a lot of that in their fees for playing. And then you have the double ups, which usually if it's a field of 20, after the site takes their fees, the top 8 cash. So if you do a $10 buy-in and you make it into the top 8, doesn't matter if you're first or 8th, you get like $20. That's kind of how that goes. 50-50s are double ups. And then the last one is the multipliers, which is kind of like the tournaments, except they're usually smaller. So if it's like a 20 field of people and the top 3 cash, it would be, 60% cash out on first place. And that kind of goes down to second and then third place. It's kind of like the multipliers as it works down, but those are usually top heavy. So those are your different fields. And again, you have to kind of assess your bankroll and see where you want to put your money at. And we'll kind of go over here about what we think is best for smaller bankrolls, let's say for $100.
Sure. And as we talk about those different games, I personally prefer the tournaments, right? Because I like the shot at playing for a little bit more money. The double ups, the 50-50s, that kind of thing. It's, those are cool, but they're definitely a slow roll to get there, right? Head to head, yeah, definitely want to beat your friends if you're into that kind of thing. I generally don't get into head to head, and that's not a knock on the game. It's just not for me. So you have to kind of decide what your type of game is, right? So for me, I like the tournaments, and something I'll be doing a lot of this year is finding those, limited entry, single entry, 3 entry max, 5 entry max, trying to find the ones where people can't sit there and saturate the field with a gazillion different lineups the way they can with a Millie Maker or one of the larger GPPs. So with that, let's talk a little bit about how we can take those games and actually build some money up. So bankroll management's important, right? Like how we manage money. If we've got $100, how much should I be spending in week 1 and how should I be diversifying it?
Yeah, it kind of really just depends if, let's say you're someone that puts in 100 week 1 and you're not really wanting to reinvest every single week, right? Let's say you're just on a bi-weekly schedule. Like every 2 weeks, I'm going to put in $100. You at least want to have 20 to 30% of your bankroll left over, so $20 to $30 for week 2. There is a chance that you don't win any money and none of it back, or you win $1,000 and you don't need to bankroll yourself for the rest of the season. So you have to kind of decide, okay, $70. Well, how do I want to invest that money? And so you're looking at some of these contests. Again, we talked about single entries. A lot of these apps now, they let you customize. So I'm looking at my filter right now. I'm able to customize that I want to do no more than $20 on a buy-in. I just kind of want to assess the pools. I want single entry. So again, like you talked about, you don't want people saturating the fields. You want people to be putting in their theoretical best lineup, and you're hoping that you're just doing better than they are. And that's what we're here to help you with. And then you kind of go and see what kind of cash outs you have. So I have one right here it's the NFL 25K huddle on DraftKings. It's a $5 entry with a $25,000 prize pool, and there's 5,900 people in there. It's a decent sized pool, but it's a single entry. And if you're looking at the details of it's cashed out, first place is $2,500. That's enough for me to be like, hey, I'll try a couple of these. $2,500 would be more than enough to help me bankroll the rest of the year if I want to get into some of those bigger tournaments like the Millie Maker. And it cashes out all the way to 1,245th place, which gets $10, so you double your money. So really, at 1,200, you're looking at what? 12, 24, 36, 48, almost 6,000. So about a fifth of the field is going to cash. It's about 20%. Okay. So if you can assess your lineups and put in a top 20%, you're going to cash. And I think that's where you have to be able to say, all right, do I think I can beat this many people? If not, you just shrink your player pool down. Go into something a little less, maybe 100 people or 20 people. Or You can do 5 people at a $10 buy-in, a winner take all. I mean, there's ways that you can do this.
Sure. And if you're to the point where you look at those player pools and you're feeling like, I'm not that confident in my lineups. I don't feel that great about this. I just kind of want to dip my toe in the pool here and figure this thing out. There's a ton of 25-cent games out there where you can go in and you can drop $10 and just soak a bunch of different lineup types into one game. And if you hit, you might win $100. And it's like, that's not a terrible return when you think about, hey, I'm going to soak $10 into this and, maybe win 100. That's all right. I'll take a 10x return, right? Like, that's not bad. But it's a matter of, again, where's your comfort level? How do you feel about your lineups? Who do you feel like you can play? Because you've got to be in DFS. It's a lot different than your redraft and your dynasty leagues, right? It's not just a matter of putting in the best lineup. You've got to manage the salary cap. You've got to manage, how do you differentiate yourself from the other lineups out there? Because if you're just running chalk like everybody else and everybody scores the same thing, well, guess what? You're splitting up that prize pool to even smaller pieces. Because if everybody's tied, guess what? Now you take those dollars and got to divvy them out. So you've got to figure out a way to, be a little contrarian, find those one-off players, and we'll talk about a couple of those guys a little bit later that might help you separate your lineup to drive you to the top a little bit faster. I do like what you're saying there with the, keeping 20% of your bankroll on hand for next week. That's a great idea. Definitely don't want to go and smoke your wad in week 1 and then feel like you have to reinvest in week 2. It's easy to have, hey, real football's back. My excitement level is way too high, and you smoke your whole wad. Doesn't make a lot of sense. You don't want to get into a position where you're constantly reinvesting, because that's, basically just you donating to the cause at that point, and you're no longer winning. So something to be aware of. Bankroll management, we're not going to get too deep on, because a lot of that is kind of individualized. How much money do you want to play with? And if you have questions about it, hit us up individually, and we can kind of help you figure out where you should spend your money and how to do it, and how to build your bankroll and how to position yourself to build it bigger and bigger over the course of the year, so you can walk away at the end of the season with a nice little stack of cash. Let's talk about lineup building. We figured out what contests we want to be into. We figured out how we want to manage our money, but now we got to build some lineups. So how do we want to break up the player pool? Like, there's so many dang players. Where do you start in building a lineup?
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways that I think you can identify the players that you want on your team, because at the end of the day, I think you want to be able to root for these players. And I think that's really important in keeping like a positive mental state because this is gambling at the end of the day, and you're going to have some ups and downs. But for us, so let's look at, let's just say, the Millie Maker for week 1 has 13 games on the slate. It includes the morning and the afternoon games, doesn't include Thursday, Sunday night, or Monday. So you have to say, well, that's 13 games. That's at least, 13 quarterbacks, 13 tight ends, probably 26 to, 39 wide receivers. That's a lot of players to try to identify. Like, there's so many pricing. And especially when you get to like the 4,000 is DraftKings, like, generic. We don't really know where to put this player in price, so we're going to put him at 4,000. There's probably like 40 players that are priced at $4,000. Like, and it's a lot. And you're like, man, like how? And there are a bunch of nobodies, and then you randomly like, oh, hey, this player has a good matchup, and he's $4,000. So what you need to do is you take your 13 games, and this is something that you and I have started doing, and you just got to shrink that player pool down. And so I kind of have the over-unders here for you. There are 7 games out of the 13. That's about half, that have at least a 48-point over-under. Okay, so we've shrunk that player pool down a little bit, because you don't really want to go into games like Denver versus the Giants, right? Because what gets you points? Touchdowns, high volume yardage, catches. If you're running the ball, your wide receivers aren't catching the ball. If it's a 7-13 game and defenses are, the Giants have a good defense, Denver has a good defense, there may not be a lot of fantasy points. And Vegas, who is the moneymaker of the world, doesn't think there's going to be money there, or fantasy points, let me say. So of those 7 games, let's shrink it down a little bit more. Let's try to get the best of the best, cream of the top, best games that Vegas thinks is going to put up a lot of points. And so you shrink it down to 4. You have Green Bay at New Orleans with a 50-point over-under, Cleveland at Kansas City with a 53-point over-under, Arizona at Tennessee with a 51.5, and Pittsburgh at Buffalo with a 50-point over-under. There is a lot of high-quality players that you can start your lineup. And I'm not saying you have to put every single slot from these games. but 60, 70% of your lineup should have some sort of upside to it. And then you kind of filter in where you can price.
Well, why don't we hit that Green Bay New Orleans game first? Because I'm looking at, I've been building my own little cheat sheet for this. And, hopefully I can make this thing into something functional that'll be available on gridironratings.com. Probably not this year, but maybe for next season. That will help you actually shrink that player pool quite a bit. And it'll help you identify not just the right running back to play, but also the right wide receiver, if a tight end is the right play, etc. I'm looking at Green Bay, and we're seeing, okay, we've got a 50-point over-under. It's still is it a 3-point spread still?
Yes.
Gotcha. And Green Bay's still the favorite on that one, right?
Yes.
So we can expect probably a 27-24 type ball game here. It is basically what we're getting ourselves into. So Green Bay's got a couple of field goals. We're looking at between 3 and 4 touchdowns. That's what Vegas is implying. 3 to 4 touchdowns for Green Bay, maybe 3 touchdowns for New Orleans. It's a lot of touchdowns being scored. So when we break down Green Bay's passing versus rushing touchdowns, they are significantly more likely to throw a touchdown than run a touchdown. So Aaron Rodgers becomes a no-brainer play here. So how do you feel about that? Would you rather have Rodgers, or would you rather take the cheaper Winston?
I'd rather go Rodgers, especially after last year, week 1. He just freaking lit the world on fire. And
Right.
Davante Adams had a very strong week 1 as well. And I kind of tweeted this out maybe a few days ago or a week ago. And I'm like, what's stopping Aaron Rodgers just from throwing 300 yards and 3 touchdowns simply because he just wants to, right? Like nothing is stopping him from being like,
oh yeah,
this offseason drama. Like, here's the best quarterback in the league. Boom.
30 I'm never one to predict back-to-back MVP seasons. That's not what I do. But Aaron Rodgers is going full scorched earth this year. I really honestly believe that his mission is to make the front office in Green Bay pay for all of their perceived indiscretions against him. Because if he goes out and has another MVP quality season and he can opt out of his contract, the handshake agreement sounds like they can't franchise tag him and that he has the opt-out ability, and Davante Adams will be a free agent. So if he just peppers Davante Adams with 24 touchdowns this year, that's obviously an absurd figure, and I'm a little tongue in cheek, right? We're not really projecting that, but he goes completely nuts, and it's 300 to 325 every week, 3 to 4 touchdowns every week. Adams is the wide receiver 1. It puts Green Bay in a tough spot to be able to bring both those guys back, especially if Rodgers gives him the finger in the offseason. So I definitely can see him going full scorched earth. And this New Orleans defense isn't good. We don't know if Marshawn Lattimore is going to play. That news still hasn't come down yet. But if Lattimore plays, I might be off of the Davante Adams stack, and I think I'm going to go grab Randall Cobb.
Yeah, it's actually kind of nice to have a almost certain wide receiver 2 in this offense, because you're just kind of playing a guessing game of it's a Robert Tonyan game where I think he had 3 touchdowns in a game last year.
Yeah, and it's twice actually.
It's man, could we get some consistency, please? I would love to be able to have the number 2 in just one of the best offenses in the league. But yeah, he's priced at 3,900. I think a little later we're going to talk about the sub 4,500 lineup that you're going to need some of these players. If you want Derrick Henry or Dalvin Cook or Christian McCaffrey in your lineups, you're going to have to counter that pricing with some of these players. Cobb is a really good flex wide receiver that you can put in your lineups. And Rodgers is priced at 6,800 as the quarterback 6. And I don't know if he's ever going to be lower than he is right now, because you do have the bonus, right? Something we don't really talk about a whole lot, but you get 3 points for a 300 passing bonus for throwing for 300 yards in a game. And there is the chance that Aaron Rodgers has rushed in plenty of touchdowns on his own. So, there are plenty of opportunities there for him to easily be the quarterback 1.
Oh, for sure. If Rodgers goes out and gets you 25 to 30 fantasy points, that's a big win for your lineup. And if Cobb goes out and at, a $3,900 price tag, you're talking, if you're trying to get, 3X minimum, right? Let's spot him at 4K, 4,000, right? So 3X, he only needs 12 points. He goes out and he gets you 555 and a touchdown. Yeah. You cleared it pretty easily, and that gave you plenty of money to go get guys like Kamara or Chubb or whoever else. Because in that same matchup, Kamara torched Green Bay last year, and I don't know that this would be all that dissimilar. Drew Brees or no Drew Brees, Kamara just kind of owns the Packers. And so that might be a nice little package to run with if you just want to stack that game up. You could still run Rodgers, Kamara, put Randall Cobb in there, and you've got yourself a nice little interesting 3-man kind of plug on that particular game.
Yeah, I actually I was in my single entry lineup that I was mentioning earlier as an example. I actually have the majority of these players in the lineup where I have Rodgers, Kamara, Devontae Adams, and Callaway. I was able to get them all in my lineup and still field a pretty solid, lineup for 1 week, because I think they're probably going to smash the over on this 50-point over/under, especially with Winston. Like, do you think Winston over/under 1.5 interceptions for week 1? What would you do? Would you take the over on that, or? How do you feel about Winston week 1 against?
I think he throws a pick. He'll throw one because I feel like there's death taxes, Will Fuller injuries, and Jameis Winston interceptions, and so he'll throw one. But he could also throw 3 touchdowns, and it could be Callaway, Kamara, and insert random other receiver. I think we might be having a little bit of audio issues there, buddy. I didn't hear anything you said there. Yeah. You were kind of cutting up a little bit. Do we have you back?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's good, right? Like he has that opportunity to be able to throw 2 interceptions, but still throw for 350 yards and 2 touchdowns. And that may not be good for him, but it's good for the rest of the team.
Yeah, and that's going to be the big thing is, can he throw the 2 or 3 touchdowns also? And that's going to be what dictates everything. And when I put together a DFS lineup, I'm looking at where are the matchups, right? So if I'm looking at that Packers-Saints game and I'm saying, okay, well, I want to play that game and I want to be involved in it because I think there's a lot of points being scored. Naturally, you want Rodgers and Adams and Jones and Kamara. And you see all these guys that you can go get, right? And Callaway's the sexy name right now, but if Callaway's the one and he's matched up on the perimeter with Jair Alexander, I don't want any part of Callaway. Jair Alexander is the best cover corner in football right now, and I don't want any part of a guy that's kind of falling into a wide receiver 1 role when he's playing against the number 1 guy in the league. I think I'd rather take Callaway in some other weeks. Let someone else play the hype. Yeah, Kyle, it looks like you're still having some technical issues here. You're really choppy and breaking up. I'm not.
I don't know why that messed up.
Oh, hey, Kyle, if you can hear me, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fly this thing solo for a second while you go ahead and get your network worked out or get your mic set. Not sure what the technical issue is there. Sorry, guys. You're going live. These are things that happen. Sometimes the internet is just kind of a funky thing and it hates people. With that, let's shoot on to a couple of other matchups here. So we know, obviously, Green Bay, New Orleans can be a pretty killer matchup. Some of the other over-unders that Kyle was referring to, Cleveland, Kansas City, that's going to be a big one. Obviously, we have the sexy names that we can get into there, but a 53.5 over-under, 6-point spread. Kansas City's the favorite. Basically we're saying, hey, it's going to be a 30-24 ball game or something near it. So another game with at least 7 touchdowns scored. That's quite a few. Great guys to look at. Obviously, if you can afford to pay up, you go get Kelsey. But really, I don't know that we love any of the receivers. I don't love Tyreek Hill against Denzel Ward because Ward can run. So this isn't a guy that is going to be easily, scared off or burned by Tyreek Hill, the way guys in Tampa Bay were last year, for example. This could be a really interesting spot to go contrarian where people are trying to load up and get Kansas City players. I might not be afraid of getting a guy like Baker Mayfield and seeing if that Browns offense is forced to throw it late because Kansas City jumps out to a lead. And if that's the case, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take Baker and I'm going to stack him up with Odell Beckham. And then for the run it back, I might go look at trying to get Kelsey in the lineup, and that gives me the exposure to Mahomes on the other side. So this way, if Mahomes throws 3 touchdowns and 2 of them are to Kelsey, you're still in the green, right? Things still look good. And if Mayfield's forced to throw it and he gets to those points in garbage time, you're looking at Mayfield, potentially Beckham. Both guys are super cheap. It allows you the opportunity at that point to afford a guy like Derrick Henry. You could afford, Travis Kelsey. You can afford a couple of these big name guys, especially if you pepper in another low cost option, like a Terrace Marshall or a Jalen Waddle, and keep your costs down on some of these other players. Then you can get a few superstars loaded in as well. Just a different way to play, gives you a different outlook, I guess. Bouncing on to another game, we talked about Arizona, Tennessee. With Arizona and Tennessee, we're looking at a 51.5 over under here. Closing line right now, this is as of 2 days ago, was 3 points. So we're expecting Tennessee to beat Arizona by 3. So 27-24 ball game. We're looking at 7, maybe 8 touchdowns in this matchup also. You can see the trend here, right? We're looking for games where we're expecting about 7 to 8 touchdowns scored. So we can figure out what the odds are of some of these key players getting those touchdowns. Tennessee, obviously, they love to run the ball. They love to get Derrick Henry involved. He's going to be, in terms of the high-priced guys, he'll be as chalky as they get. It's not going to be a question of who's getting the rock in the run game, or if Tennessee happens to be winning late, who's going to be touching the ball a lot. It's going to be Derrick Henry and a steady dose of him moving forward there. Obviously, if Julio and A.J. Brown are healthy, that whole offense becomes super dangerous, but there's no way to afford all of them. There's just not a good avenue to it without, plugging in $2,000 garbage players at the bottom of the roster. So a game worth looking at, but I would certainly be, if you want to play the role of, hey, Tennessee's going to win, I like them, as the favorite, and they're going to be running it late, go ahead and load up Derrick Henry. If you want to go ahead and play the opposite side, you can go and take Arizona, play Kyler Murray, stack him up. I would actually be on board with going and grabbing like Rondell Moore in week 1. I think he's going to be their favorite new gadget player because the idea of getting Kyler and DeAndre Hopkins in your lineup really might be pricey enough where it keeps you from being able to load up at some other positions. But that'll be on a matchup by matchup basis there. Kyle, looks like you're back. How you sounding? You good? And we can see him, but we still can't hear him. It's a little sad face you got on there, a little frozen sad face. That's right. I'm just going to keep running here until I hear you chime in. Once again, folks, sorry for the technical difficulties. Live shows on a Sunday, and sometimes the internet hates people. So let's hit another one that's got a pretty high over-under, Pittsburgh and Buffalo. Some people really like the Steelers' defense just because, hey, in DK, you get points for things like interceptions, sacks, and things of the sort. And the Steelers still have TJ Watt. He can still get after any quarterback, so there could be some sack upside there. They just brought in Joe Schobert, so now you're going to have TJ Watt in there with Schobert, with Devin Bush, who's coming off of the injury.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, there's Kyle. We got him back. Welcome back, sir.
Yeah, no.
Yep, I got you. Can you hear me? Now you can't hear me?
So weird.
Hey, buddy.
Yeah, you just keep going.
Okay, I'll just keep going. Okay. Buffalo, Pittsburgh. So, hey, we talked a little bit about the defense. TJ Watt's going to get you some sacks. They get Schobert. They've got Bush. You've also got a kind of a revolving door filling in for Bud Dupree. You've got Alex Highsmith. You've got Melvin Ingram. We don't know who that guy is going to be yet, but that defense still looks pretty daunting. I don't have a lot of faith in Big Ben getting you many points. But this is a game where, hey, someone's got to score some points. Buffalo's a 7-point favorite. We're looking at a 29-22 implied total there. You got to love the Bills, right? This might be a spot where if the Bills get out to a reasonable enough lead and they can run the ball late, I'm going to be all over Zach Moss. He's a cheap option that you can plug in and, again, build around, right? If you want to load up on some superstars and you need to find a cheap option at running back or wide receiver or somewhere else, Zach Moss is the guy that's going to see the bulk of the carries in those late game situations if Buffalo's winning. It's a long shot play. It's not something I recommend you stack in your lineups with, in terms of, 100% exposure. But if you're going to run 10 lineups, I wouldn't be opposed to having one or two that has Zach Moss in there in that RB2 slot. It just gives you a different look to your lineup, and it might be just contrarian enough to take you to the top of some of these smaller tournaments. Wide receivers, obviously Steph Diggs is the guy, right? If you're loading up Josh Allen, you load up Steph Diggs, you're getting one of the best stacks in terms of quarterback receiver that you can match up. I love Steph Diggs. I don't care about Joe Hayden. I don't think the Steelers can cover Steph Diggs. I don't really think anybody can right now, to be honest with you. So you can take those two guys and load up Moss and then just fill in around them, right? Take some of those other cheap options. Maybe you can plug in a guy from some of these other games. Maybe look at like San Francisco, Detroit. It's a lower over-under game, but the Niners should stomp out Detroit pretty handily. So you could end up pairing up maybe like a Deebo Samuel or a Brandon Ayuk in your wide receiver group, who's a little bit cheaper, and it's going to allow you more budget to go ahead and pay up at some other spots. Maybe you're paying up at tight end. Maybe you're paying up that other wide receiver slot. But definitely a game worth looking at. I am avoiding the Steeler wideouts. Juju, Deontay Johnson are priced really similarly, 6,800, 6,900. And one of them is going to end up seeing Tre'Davious White. No, thank you. I don't want any part of that. I don't want to play against. I don't want to tempt those fates. I don't think Ben's got the arm that he's always had. I don't think he's honestly capable of beating a number one corner anymore. So whoever's in the slot is who I'd want. And right now, I don't think we have enough clarity to name that guy. So staying away from the Steeler receivers, I would consider Najee Harris, but that Buffalo defense doesn't look terrible right now. So the rookie running back, if the passing game isn't hitting, I don't know that he's even viable unless he catches a boatload of passes. So I would consider, if you believe in the Buffalo offense, Diggs, Allen, go get him. Moss is that other guy, the third guy that I really like there. If you think, hey, the Steelers defense is just too good, they're going to shut everybody down. Cool. Skip the Bills offense, play the Steelers defense, but there's not a whole lot on the Steelers offense to get excited about. So I might not be too thrilled about jumping into that particular matchup. Let's hit a couple more. The Niners and the Lions, 46-point over-under, 7.5-point spread. Looks like a 27-19 ball game with the Niners as the favorite. Look, nobody likes Jimmy Garoppolo right now. Everybody wants Trey Lance. I hate to be that guy, but it'll be Garoppolo starting week 1. Hasn't been announced yet, but Shanahan played these games during the draft with Mac Jones or Trey Lance or Justin Fields or whoever he was going to pick. He just lets everybody talk. He already knows what he's doing. When asked, hey, do you know who the starting quarterback is going to be week 1? Jimmy Garoppolo just winked at the reporter and said, yeah, I've got a pretty good idea. I don't think you give that kind of response unless you already know you're the starter. Jimmy's going to play. The Detroit Lions have been one of the most fantasy-friendly defenses out there the last couple of years. Last year, I think they allowed 11 QB1 weeks out of 16, which is pretty insane. And they haven't done a whole lot to improve. Adding Alex Anzalone is not the big difference here that's going to make that defense suddenly shut anybody down. So the Niners should be able to be a cheap stack that you can run out there. You can go ahead and do Garoppolo and Ayuk. Ayuk is battling a hamstring injury. He's expected to be ready to go week 1. If Ayuk is not ready to go, Deebo, Kittle, it's very easy to stack up Kittle, either one of the wideouts, and Garoppolo, and you've got yourself a great core, and then you can spend up big at running back. Then you can tie in Derrick Henry. You can tie in Alvin Kamara. You can go ahead and take maybe Jacksonville's defense, which will be a little lesser owned playing against Houston and a little less expensive. You can start building a lineup where you're taking advantage of a lot of individual matchups now. So a lot of flexibility there. The over-under isn't great on that particular game, but it does allow you the budget to get into all the other games as well. Last one I think we'll hit on here is going to be Seattle and Indianapolis. So we've got a 48-point over-under, 2.5-point spread. Seattle is the favorite. So 25-23 is kind of what we're looking at, right? So again, another game where maybe about 7 touchdowns. I love Seattle here. Give me Russell Wilson, new offensive coordinator again, but they've got to let Russ cook. We saw what he did the first 8-9 weeks last season where he was absolutely on fire. Indianapolis cannot cover DK Metcalf. They don't have a body that they can put on him to cover him downfield, over the middle, or really anywhere else. And you still have Tyler Lockett. Chris Carson is a more than effective pass catcher out of the backfield. There's a lot happening there for Seattle that allows this game to get out of control pretty quickly. So I'm totally on board with having some lineups that have Russ and DK stacked, and then I'll take, Indianapolis. I might grab like Michael Pittman on kind of the run it back, assuming they're going to have to throw it a lot. He's another cheap option that allows me to pay up at other positions. The only reason I'm looking at Pittman right now is because we just heard that T.Y. Hilton is going to be out for a few weeks, highly likely to miss week 1, maybe week 2 and 3. It looks like a practice-related injury. We'll know more probably by this time next week. And so that opens the door for Pittman. It opens the door maybe for Paris Campbell and some of these other pass catchers. The assumption right now that we're operating with is Carson Wentz will be playing week 1. And if he is, there's going to be some ability for them to kind of get some garbage time points. So give me Russ, give me DK. I'll take Pittman on the run it back, and then we'll go ahead and we'll pay up in some other slots because Pittman's super cheap. Russ is, I think, the 4th or 5th most expensive quarterback. You've got some budget to play with now where you can still go ahead and get some elite or near elite players at other positions. I think that's really the gist of where we're at with some of these matchups. We'll go into them in more depth next week as we lead up with this preseason bye week that we're dealing with. And let's see, I think we might have Kyle back here. Kyle, you're with us?
Am I here?
There, I hear you. There you go. You're back.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, now that I did all the work.
Yeah. Love and hate the internet at the same time, man. Technology is fantastic.
Well, I'll tell you what, you're right on time. I tried to shoot through that stuff where, we're hitting this thing. We're about 46 minutes now. We usually try to wrap up around this time, but we do still have one thing left to do here. Let's talk about a couple lineup builds. Like, I've already gone through some of the players I like in all these individual games, but let's shoot through, give me a lineup build that you've put together that you like. Quarterback, running back, wide receivers, tight end, defense. What's your flavor? What are you looking at?
Yeah, and so we've talked about, breaking down these games. I've done a little bit of everything, and I'm trying to pull up my Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins stack to kind of give you an idea of if you really want to pay up and get these two guys into your lineup, this is what it's probably going to look like. And I got it right here for you. So I went ahead and did where'd you go? So I went ahead and did the Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins stack at running back. I was actually able to get Nick Chubb and Raheem Mostert. We talked about how the Detroit Lions are, giving up those fantasy points. They just seem to be doing that. And I still think Mostert, who didn't play last week in the preseason last week, is still going to be at least the running back 1 for now. His wife or girlfriend, whoever she was, came out on Twitter or Instagram the other day and was like, he's not injured. I don't know where this back injury story is coming from. So it's kind of straight from the source. She's like, you guys are always trying to make a narrative. So I feel good about him for week 1. Again, he's kind of like the Gus Edwards where it's 13 carries, 130 yards and a touchdown. I'm not going to be surprised. He's kind of how he's built his career the last 2 years. Again, Nick Chubb, high game script. I think they're going to try to focus the running game through Nick Chubb this year, especially after giving him that contract. And they're going to have to slow that game down versus Kansas City, right, which is always ironic because it's you probably want to outscore the Chiefs and not try to slow them down. But old coaches' philosophies, I think that's just kind of where we're going to be at. And I actually was able to pair DeAndre Hopkins with Robbie Anderson, someone that I think we all like a lot as a high-volume receiver against the Jets. And Jalen Waddle is just someone I'm putting into my lineup 60% of the time. He's priced at, I believe, $3,800. He's someone that's below that 4K level that, look, if I want to get these high-priced players in my lineup, that's where I'm going, $3,600. And then Irv Smith came in at my tight end, someone I think we also like a lot for good touchdown opportunities and just a big playmaker. He had a good 3 weeks there at the end of the season when Rudolph was out. And then Steelers defense, something you talked about a second ago. I think they're just going to be big plays. You don't get points really for shutting teams out, right? If you don't get those sacks and interceptions, if you don't have those high probability for touchdowns, there's really no point in running that defense because how often are there shutouts in the NFL? Never. So you're not going to get those. And I have, at the current time, I have LaVisca Chenault in my flex. I'm still kind of messing with that flex option, but there's guys there like Russell Gage, who is in a high over-under against the Eagles and looks to take a step up. You can go running back like a guy like Melvin Gordon if we expect him to kind of, run that show at least for the first couple of weeks. And so, or Cortland Sutton, who's priced pretty low at 5,200. So there's options there that even though I paid up for Chubb, Hopkins, and Kyler Murray, there's a lot of other friendly players in my lineup.
Sure. Yeah. No, I like that a lot. I have I'm kind of a degenerate, and I had a bazillion and one DK crowns lying around. And so I entered a ton of like these 10-cent and 25-cent games that I was able to just like use all my crowns on. So I didn't put a whole lot of thought into these lineups, but I was kind of looking at it, and they're not too far off of what we, kind of just shot through in all those, individual game matchups there. But I took one that I thought was interesting, and I don't know if it's going to be good, but I like it, and I think it's interesting. And I went quarterback Baker Mayfield, and I paired him up with Nick Chubb and Odell Beckham. So full Brown stack against the Chiefs, just anticipating the shootout, right? Nick Chubb didn't come off the field when the game was in question last year. It was Kareem Hunt that came in to salt games away. So if this game is close, Nick Chubb should be on the field and getting more touches even late. Now, I paired Nick Chubb with Derrick Henry in the backfield against Arizona. I love the idea of Derrick Henry running over this Cardinals defense. I don't think they're as good as advertised, even with the J.J. Watt ad. And with going out and changing up their linebacking group, I'm not feeling it. Give me Derrick Henry. At wideout, I paired Odell Beckham up with Jalen Waddle, who, like you, I like him because of the price, and with no Will Fuller and all the reports that have camped about how much chemistry he's showing with Tua, and they played, in college together at Alabama. I expect him to kind of hit the ground running right away. So took Waddle. Also went Terrace Marshall for the Panthers against the Jets. Terrace has looked phenomenal in the preseason, and from a sheer talent standpoint, he strikes me as the number 2 wide receiver in this group. Now, they did just give Robbie Anderson a 2-year extension. You got to pay DJ Moore, I think, in a year. It's a really interesting wide receiver group. To me, this was just going contrarian, right? Like, I feel like people are going to be off Terrace Marshall in week 1 simply because he'll be the 3rd or 4th wide receiver in the offense. My thought here is that if the Jets go out and they try to lock down Robbie Anderson, and you got DJ Moore on the perimeter, that Terrace becomes a guy that could be working over the slot, over the middle, or he could be catching a 3rd corner on the perimeter. And he torched those guys all preseason long. And the Jets secondary isn't good. So that could be a sneaky play where if he shows up and he gets you 10 points, it's a win. Give me 10, give me 12, 14 points. That's a huge win right there. Got Johnny Smith at tight end. Feel pretty good about that. When he's on the field, it seems like he's getting targets. He's running a lot of routes. He's getting a bunch of targets. Seems like he's in for a better year than advertised. Flex play went Dalvin Cook, paid up again. So I got 3 stud running backs in my lineup. And then I took the Steelers defense. It's not that I don't trust the Bills, but I want to play both sides of this coin, because as much as we like Josh Allen and his fantasy upside, we love Diggs and all these guys. If Allen comes out and throws a pick and gets sacked twice, and, say Singletary coughs one up or something like that, the Steelers could allow 15, 20 points, easily to the Bills and then still be fantasy viable because they have all the turnovers.
Yeah, I think I'm going to put the stat up real quick because I think that's something that needs to be talked about. But the Bills last night rolled out their starting lineups. And Josh Allen yesterday, pulling it up, he threw the ball 26 times. And apparently within 27 plays, they ran the ball once. So that if you're telling me that Josh Allen week 1 versus the Steelers is probably going to throw the ball 40 times, there are, as good as he was last year, I think we can expect maybe a little bit of regression. I remember a few weeks into the season, I don't remember who he was playing, but he had this awful throw into the red zone. I mean, it was probably week 1, week 2, where you're like, dude, that was a terrible miss. That should have been picked off. What are you doing? And while he was good and definitely progressed, he still has those weird, who are you type of plays. That's not the Josh Allen we saw. I think there are opportunities for the Steelers. They have playmakers at every single level, like you mentioned before. And so if they're going to throw the ball 40 times, I think you can guarantee at least 3 sacks, and maybe you can get an interception in there. Interceptions go for touchdowns occasionally. So, yeah, I'm right there with you.
And as long as the Steelers don't allow, 27 points, that should still be a 10 to 12 point ball game for their defense if they get a pick and a few sacks. And so again, I don't mind the Steelers defense. They'll probably never be cheaper than they are now.
Yeah.
Because that defense, when you just look at the personnel, they look to be pretty good. This is a team that really needs some help on the O-line. They really badly need to get something done at quarterback because Big Ben's dusted. It's over. Unless he like whips off the bandages like Lazarus and, comes back to life, like I don't see how this is going to be a thing for him this year. And a lot of those Steelers wideouts are being badly overrated as a result. But yeah, give me that lineup again. I'm not coming out here and advocating starting 2 rookies in all of your lineups, but this was something I thought was just plainly interesting. I got a taste of the Tennessee offense with Henry and Jonnu. I got a taste of the Browns Chiefs game, even though I went all Browns side. I got a piece of a lot of different games that I thought were interesting. And so I still had $100 in salary left over, which was kind of nice. But we'll talk more about some specific lineups next week. Next week what we'll do is we'll go through 2 or 3 killer lineups that we like a lot for DK, and we'll talk about kind of some final picks for Thrive, which, with that, I think we're wrapping this thing up, but I'll let everybody know, hey, come find us on DK, challenge us to a game. We're happy to play against you. Mm-hmm. We're out there. Gridiron Ratings is the handle. Hop on Thrive Fantasy. Definitely give that a look. We're going to do a bunch of different props on that, and we're going to be playing a bunch of contests there. Be sure to use the Gridiron Ratings promo code. It's GR2021. We're here to go ahead and help you get your first deposit matched. So go ahead and get signed up at Thrive, get that initial deposit matched, and let's play a bunch of different ways. Let's win some money this year. Kyle, anything else you have to add here before we shut this thing down for the day?
No, everything sounds great. Just excited, and hopefully your redraft leagues go well this week because I know I got mine. This is the last weekend before the fantasy season starts.
we had some comments we missed here about 20 minutes ago. We had Jordan Vanek said, "Who should I play?" He's like, "But I don't like Baker. He's short." Sorry, Jordan. I know Baker's short. I like Baker. I want to play Baker. Kick rocks.
He is. He's just interesting, man. I think he's actually a solid quarterback.
Yeah. But we'll put Jordan's comment right here. I don't like Baker. He's short. I just think that's funny. So for those of you that don't know, Jordan used to work with us here at Gridiron Ratings. He was our DFS guy. He's actually since gone on to take on a few posts with 4for4 and Awesemo. Phenomenal follow on Twitter, at Jordan Vanek1, or actually might be at Jordan Vanek DFS now. But you can see his name spelled on the screen, Jordan, Vanek. We love Jordan. Jordan, don't kick rocks. You'll hurt your toes. So with that, leave us some comments. Go ahead and subscribe. Click the like button if you heard anything you enjoyed. If you didn't like it, leave a comment. Let us know because we're happy to discuss and take on some new ideas and tell us how dumb we are. We're happy to, to take that criticism too. Follow us on Twitter at Gridiron Rating. Until next time. For Kyle Carroll, I'm Jeff DiMatteo. We wish you nothing but success in 2021. Take care.